One tape. No warning, no captions. Just a drop that flipped the rap game upside down. 50 Cent didn't just come for Rick Ross, he came for his legacy. And once you see what's inside, you'll understand why the entire industry is in panic mode. The rap world has seen its fair share of feuds, diss tracks, and headline-grabbing clashes. But nothing prepared the culture for the shockwave that erupted when 50 Cent blindsided Rick Ross with a fresh drop of explosive tapes. What looked like another layer in hip-hop rivalry turned out to be far more calculated at tactical strike, years in the making, engineered with the kind of patience and precision that only someone like 50 could pull off. It wasn't a stunt. It wasn't a trolling attempt. It was an earthquake that cracked the surface of the entire industry and exposed fault lines no one wanted to admit were there. For years, Ross had projected an untouchable image. He paraded his franchises, his sprawling real estate, his endless collection of luxury cars, and his carefully constructed narrative of dominance. His persona was larger than life, dripping in opulence and commanding respect. To many fans, Ross wasn't just a rapper. He was a mogul, a blueprint for how an artist could expand far beyond music and into empire building. But while Ross was busy flaunting, celebrating, and solidifying his public persona, 50 Cent was quietly doing something else, watching, waiting, and collecting. Behind the scenes, he was building a catalog of ammunition, pieces of proof and receipts tucked away for the moment they would matter most. That moment arrived without warning. No hints, no teaser posts, no cryptic tweets or staged leaks to build anticipation. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday, 50 uploaded a single tape to the internet with zero caption, and that was all it took. Within minutes, the hip-hop world lit up like a fuse connected to dynamite. The footage spread at lightning speed, igniting chaos across every platform. It wasn't just the content of the tape that stunned people, it was the element of surprise, the sheer audacity of dropping it without context. That silence said more than any caption ever could. This wasn't hype. This wasn't promo. It was war? The reaction was immediate and catastrophic for Ross. Executives who had stood confidently behind him for years found themselves locked in closed-door meetings, scrambling to assess the fallout. PR teams, seasoned in crisis management, panicked at the scope of the problem. And anyone with even a slight affiliation to Ross or to Diddy, who appeared linked in the material, stepped back into the shadows, unwilling to risk getting caught in the crossfire. Suddenly, the industry didn't look like the glitzy, untouchable world Ross had built around himself. It looked fragile, combustible, and ready to crack under the weight of revelation. For Ross, the moment of realization came quickly. Midway through a business meeting, his phone buzzed uncontrollably. At first, he brushed it off, dismissing it as just another 50 Cent stunt. Another chapter in their long-running tension. But when he finally saw the footage himself, the room went cold. This wasn't trolling. This wasn't banter. This was a precision strike aimed directly at the foundations of his career and reputation. The move wasn't just about humiliating Ross, it was about destabilizing him, stripping away the armor he'd spent more than a decade forging. The leaks were devastating. They didn't just show Ross in casual settings. They exposed him in private moments with Diddy, in conversations and circumstances that stretched far beyond what Ross had ever admitted publicly. There were even recordings of him boasting about hidden deals with rising artists, claims that contradicted the narrative he'd carefully pushed for years. This wasn't a slip, it was a pattern, one that painted a picture of Ross as less authentic than he portrayed, and far more entangled in behind-the-scenes maneuvering than fans had imagined. Industry insiders were quick to point out the severity of the situation. Footage like this, they explained, has the power to freeze a career overnight. Hip-hop thrives on authenticity, on the credibility of lived experience. And when that image is punctured even slightly, the effects ripple far and wide. With each new clip that surfaced, the gap between Ross's claims and reality grew harder to ignore. His carefully built origin story, once a source of pride, began to unravel piece by piece, leaving fans and peers alike questioning what was real and what had been manufactured. Ross's team scrambled desperately to contain the fire. They issued denials, tried to discredit the footage, and pushed statements to regain control of the narrative. But every move they made seemed to be countered immediately. 50 wasn't just dropping one bomb and walking away, he was tightening the trap, unleashing more material that undercut every denial Ross tried to offer. With each release, Ross's credibility slipped further, and the narrative became harder to wrestle back. His denial sounded less like confidence and more like panic, fueling speculation rather than silencing it. The industry was left reeling. Partnerships that once seemed bulletproof suddenly looked fragile. Brands that had aligned themselves with Ross's image of success and luxury quietly reassessed their ties, worried about the blowback. In boardrooms, the whispers turned into serious discussions about whether Ross could survive the storm or whether his empire had been irreparably compromised. The hip-hop community thrives on strength, on perception, on the illusion of being untouchable, and suddenly, Ross looked exposed. What made the situation even more lethal was the precision with which 50 executed his move. He had waited patiently, letting Ross build his empire, letting him feel invincible, and then struck when the risk was greatest. It was the equivalent of pulling a card from the bottom of a towering house of cards. Everything came crashing down. At once, the cultural shockwaves weren't just about Ross's vulnerability. They were about the reminder that in hip-hop, no one is ever truly untouchable, no matter how high they climb. Fans, peers, and critics alike couldn't look away. Social media buzzed with reactions, memes, and debates. Was Ross finished? Was 50 simply exposing what people already suspected? Or was this just the opening salvo in a much larger war that would reshape the rap landscape for years to come? One thing was certain. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a tectonic shift, a recalibration of power in a culture that thrives on it. Ross, once seen as a fortress of confidence and luxury, now looked cornered. His team could try to control the fallout, but the damage had already rippled out of their reach. With every passing hour, the story grew, spread, and solidified in the minds of fans and executives alike. And looming over it all was one undeniable truth. If this was only 50 Cent's first move, the next blow could be catastrophic. In the cutthroat arena of hip-hop, where narratives are currency and image is everything, Ross now stood on the edge of a precipice. The empire he had built, brick by brick, was beginning to tremble under the weight of revelation. His opponents smelled blood in the water. His allies questioned their loyalty, and the industry at large braced for impact. Knowing that the storm wasn't over, it was just beginning. Because this wasn't just about Ross versus 50, this was about the culture itself. About the fragility of empires built on perception, and about the brutal reality that in a world where receipts can surface at any moment, the past is never really buried. 50 Cent didn't just drop a tape, he tore open the walls of hip-hop's carefully curated image-making, and reminded everyone watching that nothing, and no one, is beyond collapse. And as the whispers in boardrooms grow louder, one question cuts through all the noise. When the next move comes, and everyone knows it, will Ross's legacy survive the impact, or will this be the moment history remembers as the day his empire burned to ash? When the flood of notifications hit, Ross cracked under the pressure. His phone lit up like a siren, vibrating with millions of alerts he couldn't ignore, and, instead of retreating into silence, he went live. What followed was a frantic, unfiltered 15-minute Instagram rant filled with threats and raw emotion that instantly set off alarms within his own camp. To fans, he looked worn down, and on edge. To his PR team, it was a nightmare, the calculated image Ross had spent years perfecting, one of control. Power and stability was replaced overnight with the sight of a man unraveling before the entire world. He wasn't denying the tapes anymore. He wasn't dodging, he was swinging directly at 50, but the swings looked wild, desperate, and sloppy. It didn't stop there. Ross began firing off voice notes, urging people not to share the footage, begging some, threatening others. It was a move that only deepened the sense of desperation. He went live again, this time naming names and dropping personal details, including some about 50 that had the internet spinning. Every time he spoke, every time he posted, he only widened the crater. What should have been a controlled response turned into gasoline on the fire. Allies who had once stood beside him slowly began stepping back. Sponsors went quiet, and the statements his PR team rushed to draft in defense of him were shredded instantly by Ross's own hands. As he kept undoing their strategy with impulsive outbursts, by the time the sun rose, his closest partners weren't planning damage control, they were begging him to walk away, to shut it down before he torched the entire empire to ashes. The desperation set in quickly, and with it came reckless decisions. Copyright strikes were fired off in every direction, Ross's team scrambling to wipe the tapes from the internet. But this wasn't a one-platform problem, it was everywhere. 50 had flooded every corner of the digital landscape, spreading the footage so far and so fast that there was no chance of pulling it back. It was the classic nightmare of the internet age. Once the genie is out of the bottle, You can't force it back in. Reports surfaced that Ross even offered millions to track down whoever had filmed him, desperate to cut off the leak at its source. But money couldn't buy back what was already multiplying across the web. By dawn, Instagram itself had taken action, hitting Ross's account with restrictions for repeated policy violations that forced him onto burner pages, where his posts grew even more chaotic. What had started as a crisis was rapidly turning into a spectacle, and the more Ross fought it, the deeper he sank. Behind the scenes, lawyers worked non-stop, but they were drowning. Business partners began to quietly back away. Endorsement deals that had once been easy wins now seemed radioactive. And while his team tried to put out fires, Ross himself struck a match and lit more. Instead of retreating, he doubled down, dragging other artists into the storm, airing out old debts, unpaid collaborations, and exposing fake streaming numbers that painted the entire industry in a harsh light. He wasn't just defending himself anymore, he was tearing down the walls around him, taking pieces of his kingdom down with his own hands. To fans, it was fascinating, messy, tragic, and impossible to look away. To the industry, it was horrifying. The spectacle of a mogul burning down his empire in real time. The culture fractured almost instantly. Hip-hop thrives on loyalty, but in moments of chaos, silence speaks louder than words. Some artists rallied behind 50, openly or subtly co-signing his moves. Others tried to defend Ross, but the louder the defense, the more fragile it looked. The tide of loyalty was shifting, and Ross could feel it. Meek Mill, once his protege, began liking 50's posts, a small gesture. But in the digital age, one with seismic impact, big-name artists quietly unfollowed Ross, not with press releases or statements, but with quiet, surgical distance that told fans everything they needed to know. The silence of some spoke volumes. DJ Khaled, who had long been tied to Ross in both music and friendship, kept his distance, refusing to speak on it. French Montana, on the other hand, couldn't resist. He tossed out a cryptic post about karma that the internet instantly linked to Ross. Future went a step further, posting himself blasting 50's classic Many Men on his story, a move fans read as open disrespect toward Ross. And then came Drake, dropping a cryptic bar about loyalty that sent the internet into a frenzy of speculation. In hip-hop, a single lyric can feel like a verdict, and this one had people dissecting every word, wondering if the OVO frontman had quietly picked a side. While the public feasted on the drama, the real blood was being spilled behind the scenes. Group chats across the industry lit up with memes, receipts, and inside jokes. Executives, producers, and fellow artists watched in disbelief as Ross spiraled live in front of millions. Screenshots spread faster than any press release could catch, and every attempt by Ross's team to spin the story was met with new waves of content mocking him. In those private conversations, the message was impossible to ignore. Ross was losing his grip, not just on the narrative, but on the loyalty and respect that had once been his armor. The unraveling revealed something deeper than just one man's meltdown. It stripped the mask off the industry itself. The culture of loyalty, the image of solidarity, began to look like smoke and mirrors. When pressure hit, alliances cracked. Artists who had once benefited from Ross's rise were now either silent, mocking, or cautiously stepping away. The facade of unity gave way to self-preservation, and the fracture lines became glaringly obvious. Ross's downfall, if it continued on this trajectory, wasn't just about him. It was about the reminder that in hip-hop, power is fragile, built as much on perception as it is on talent. Once that perception breaks, once the illusion of invincibility fades, the vultures circle fast. In many ways, this was 50 Cent's strategy at its purest. Don't just win a feud, destabilize your opponent so thoroughly that even their friends doubt them. And by all accounts, it was working. Ross's frantic posts, the reckless dragging of other names, the exposure of industry skeletons, it all fed into the sense of collapse. Every attempt to fight back seemed to confirm the damage rather than undo it. His empire, once a symbol of dominance, now looked like a castle on fire, each flame fueled by his own hand. The spectacle wasn't just a battle between two men. It was a mirror held up to the culture, exposing its cracks, its fragility, and the brutal truth that no one, no matter how powerful, is safe from implosion. By the end of that chaotic stretch, one truth became clear. Ross wasn't just fighting 50 anymore, he was fighting time, perception, and the weight of his own legacy. And with every passing hour, it looked less like a comeback was possible, and more like hip-hop was watching a coronation reversed into a collapse.